Good afternoon. We are all here today because we loved Sandy, a renowned leader in higher education, a remarkable advocate for the arts, a devoted husband and father, and a master of the handwritten note with a penchant for a witty saying. I would go on, but as Sandy always reminded us, you can never be too brief. To Susan and Betsy and Bill and Tom, thank you for providing all of us with this opportunity to come together today to share our appreciation and our fond memories and to express to you and to one another how much we cherished Sandy. I want to welcome everyone here to this magnificent auditorium, as well as those who are joining us virtually. I know that Sandy's family is grateful that you are here and that we are able to celebrate his extraordinary life and legacy. I'm pleased to acknowledge the beautiful music that we have been enjoying. Thank you to the incomparable Dan Knight. What a lovely way for us to begin. The people you will hear from today represent just a few of the many ways that Sandy made an impact on Iowa and on the world, and I'm honored to be among them. We will do our best, collectively, to provide a fitting tribute to the more than 60 years of service and leadership that Sandy provided. One thing that always stood out to me about Sandy was his passion for public higher education. And as I prepared for today, I was reminded that Sandy's path in life was influenced on that subject quite early. His father, Willard Boyd Sr., as many of you know, was a veterinarian at the University of Minnesota and traveled frequently across the state to work with farmers who were barely surviving the Depression. Sandy, as a tag-along on his father's travels sometimes, observed his father compassionately and patiently working with those who were desperate to make a better life for themselves. Later in his life, Sandy talked about how his father's work made an impression on him and that impact that stayed with him. He said, "It instilled in me at a very young age the importance of public service and the value of giving people the tools to make their lives better." And Sandy did that as well. As you know, he served in many roles for the university, sometimes repeatedly, as the occasion warranted. And one of his earliest tasks was helping to conceive and establish the University of Iowa Foundation, today known as the Center for Advancement, which I'm privileged to lead. Sandy was appointed by President Virgil Hancher in 1955 to travel to the sister Big Ten schools to see how they had organized their fundraising organizations. And after extensive train trips around the Big Ten and all of his research was concluded, Sandy made his presentation to President Hancher. And the State University of Iowa Foundation was formed 1 year later in 1956 with the goal of helping the university meet its needs beyond those provided by state support. The University of Iowa Foundation raised $28,000 in that first year from 1,300 contributors. I'm actually pretty impressed by that. And more importantly, Sandy's work set the stage for unprecedented growth, philanthropy, generosity at the University of Iowa to the tune of $438 million in gifts and commitments last year. This project also set him on a successful path from professor to president. Sandy had a quote that I still keep on my desk that I would share. "Fortunately, we live in an imperfect world, so we can improve it. Fortunately, we live in a diverse world, so we can learn from it. And fortunately, we live in a changing world, so we can grow in it." Sandy believed wholeheartedly in the transformative power of public higher education. And all of us at Iowa and around the world are fortunate to have learned from such a wise and thoughtful leader. A few years before his retirement from the University of Iowa Foundation wrote a story about him, and the author asked him, "What does the University of Iowa mean to you?" And Sandy answered simply, "One could say it's been my life." It's now my honor to welcome a dear and cherished friend and colleague of Sandy's to the podium, Arthur Bonfield, the Alan D. Vestal Chair and Associate Dean Emeritus of the University of Iowa College of Law, where he was a faculty member from 1962 to 2016. Arthur?
Sandy Boyd and I were good friends for almost 61 years. On my first day at the University of Iowa Law School building in May 1962, when I was the newest member of the law school faculty, Sandy introduced himself to me as a professor at the law school and asked whether there was anything he could do to help me get settled and acquainted with my new institution. This introduction resulted in a lifelong friendship for which I am endlessly grateful. I learned many things over the last 6 decades from Sandy and about Sandy. The first thing I learned was how much faculty, students, and staff at the law school liked Sandy and respected him. As Sandy took me around the law building to meet people on that first day, everyone he introduced me to reacted to him in a way that made that very obvious. My subsequent observations of Sandy also made very clear that he genuinely cared about all kinds of people and their welfare. He had great empathy for those who were less fortunate than he or had suffered from discrimination simply because of prejudice. President Hancher appointed law school professor Boyd chair of a university human rights committee in 1963. Sandy effectively led the efforts of that committee to make the university a more welcoming environment for all people. As part of his lasting commitment to human rights, Sandy also induced me at that time to draft civil rights legislation for Iowa and to write an Iowa Law Review article proposing its adoption by the Iowa General Assembly, both of which actually happened in 1965. Throughout his life, Sandy deeply believed in and sought to create, wherever he was, a community in which all kinds of people were welcome and valued. Sandy had an enormous thirst for knowledge and was very learned, very inquisitive, and had a broad range of interests. He had a keen analytical mind and believed in education for himself and for all others. Sandy was unwilling to simply accept, without further examination, all conventional wisdom or established dogma. He was always reading and kept a lifetime list of the many books he had read. At one point, Sandy became interested in the published writings of all the presidents of the United States and sought to read as many of them as he could. As a result, he amassed a personal collection of all those published writings and donated that very large collection to the University of Iowa Law Library. As a teacher at the law school, Sandy was very effective and loved by his students. As vice president and as president, he vigorously pursued, as his very first priority, the improvement of the academic educational opportunities available to all students. Sandy Boyd was a successful leader in the many roles in which he served because people liked him, trusted him, knew he was loyal and dependable, and understood that he had very good judgment. He was willing to change his mind about things when confronted with new information or good reasons to do so. Sandy often refused to take personal credit for many good things he did or accomplished. He had a way of convincing people to follow him, even when they started out hostile to actions he proposed. I observed many such occasions when it seemed to me he had produced a miracle in changing the minds of others. Sandy also carefully paid attention to details in the problems he confronted in his various leadership roles, even when he was primarily focusing on the larger picture. It is important to add that Sandy was also a man of great personal courage. One evening during the large Iowa City Vietnam War protests in May 1970, the campus police warned President Boyd that there was a real potential for violence on the Pentacrest, where thousands of people were gathered. Despite campus police urging him not to do so because it was too dangerous, Sandy walked through the center of the huge crowd on the Pentacrest that included some who were acting unruly and advocating violence. And Sandy addressed the gathered thousands from the steps of the old Capitol using a microphone and successfully calmed the huge crowd. Sandy's actions and effective leadership, good judgment, and courage avoided violence on this campus during the Vietnam War protests and preserved the civil liberties of the peaceful thousands involved in the demonstrations. Sandy believed in and practiced as a central tenet of his life service to the institutions of which he was a part, to the larger community, and to other people. He also deeply embraced the cause of justice, fairness, and equality of opportunity through the rule of law for all members of our society. He lived his life guided by a pervasive moral code that permeated his very action. Sandy also had a great sense of humor and was not above hamming it up with or playing jokes on his friends. As faculty advisor to the Iowa Law Review in 1965, Sandy presented me, as soon as it arrived at the law school from the printer, a copy of the bound issue of the Iowa Law Review that contained my first article published in that particular journal. When I excitedly opened the copy of the journal he presented me, I found, to my horror, that the title page of my article was upside down. Sandy had carefully cut out the title page of my article and glued it back in the journal upside down. Sandy Boyd was a very modest, humble, unpretentious man with few personal material wants and who had no need or desire to elevate himself over anyone else. He was a very kind man who could and did get along well with all types of people. Whether he was professor of law, associate dean of the law school, vice president for academic affairs, we call it provost today, president of the university, or president of the Field Museum. He brought laudable moral values to the problems he encountered and lived by them in his decision-making and actions. But of course, Sandy was also a realist, as any great leader must be, though that realism often caused him great anguish and discomfort in his efforts to deal with it. After 61 years of close engagement with him, I believe Sandy was one of the most admirable human beings I have ever encountered in my life, and I am so grateful for the time I was lucky enough to spend with him. The world is a much poorer place without him.
Thank you, Arthur. That was beautiful. Thank you. As Lynette alluded to, in the summer of 1955, 29-year-old assistant law professor Willard Sandy Boyd was on a train bound for Champaign, Illinois. It was hot and it was uncomfortable, and he had been dispatched, as he termed it, by then University of Iowa President Virgil Hancher for the purpose of discovering what other Big Ten schools were doing to raise money from alumni. This is a totally new concept among public institutions, and Sandy was intrigued by the notion of private financial support for Iowa. Sandy started his career with a curiosity about fundraising and development, and then returned to that interest during his later years when he founded and led the Larned A. Waterman Iowa Nonprofit Resource Center in the UI College of Law. Those were interesting bookends to a rather remarkable career. For me, that train trip back in 1955 placed in motion a series of events that would ultimately cause our paths to cross, and it would be a course that would change my life. I've known Sandy in a number of capacities. First, he was my president when I was a student here at Iowa. Soon, he became instrumental in my being added to the staff of the fledgling University of Iowa Foundation, now called the Center for University Advancement. I came aboard in 1973. Darrell Wyrick, who was then the UI Foundation Executive Director, and Sandy, they were both my advocates. They were both career and moral compasses for me. And during the next 50 years, Sandy was also my boss, he was my role model, he was my mentor, and he was my friend. Now, it's hard to focus on just one or two of Sandy's strengths because he had so many, but let me try three. First, his character. Defined by Webster as the mental and moral qualities distinctive to an individual. I think all of us in this room today would agree that Sandy wrote the book on character. But for me, one example does stand out. Chicago in the fall of 1979, we were holding an Iowa luncheon downtown at the Union League Club on Jackson Street to benefit those alums working in the Loop. About 30 individuals were lined up to attend. We arrived at the club around 10:30 that morning and quickly commenced to arrange the luncheon, checking in on reservations and making sure the staff was on top of things. Sandy came to me shortly thereafter and simply said, "David, we need to find another place." I was puzzled. You mean a different room in the club, I asked. And Sandy said, no, we are not holding an event here today. Long story short, Sandy discovered the Union League Club, the membership was not open to all. There was discrimination. Sandy saw this, and that was that. No change in his mind. Absolutely, we were done with the Union League Club that day. We ended up holding our luncheon at a restaurant near the Dirksen Plaza, and actually worked out quite well. But the story was so typical of Sandy, a man of profound character, one who cared enormously about the rights of others, and who stuck to his principles. Secondly, his communication skills were an enormous strength. All of us can most likely recall, as Lynette pointed out, specific conversations with Sandy or one of those handwritten personalized notes that we all have in our drawers. Even if you disagreed with his position, you walked out of a meeting with a new respect and admiration for him. At no time did this quality of Sandy's become more evident than, as Arthur referred to, during the war protests of the late 1960s and 1970s. Sandy maintained an open-door policy with all student protesters. He would listen intently and politely to their concerns and then eloquently and thoughtfully respond. Working for the Daily Iowan in my student days, I was able to see Sandy kind of up close and personal. On one occasion, the students were very restless and militant. They wanted to take over the president's office and kidnap Sandy. Mary Pardon, Sandy's receptionist and gatekeeper, was hell-bent to keep them out of their office. When Sandy came out and literally invited them in. There must have been several hundred spilling out onto the hallway, and after a contentious 2-hour conversation, the protesters all left with the promise that Sandy, although he may not agree with all their demands, would do what he could to make their grievances heard. One of the student leaders was heard to say, and I'm taking some liberty here, but, quote, "You know, we came to kidnap the guy and hold him hostage, and he invites us in for coffee. That was mellow, man, that was mellow." Frankly, I think the students were more scared of Mary Pardon. But that was Sandy. He believed passionately in the important role that communication had in our society, whether he was speaking before students, faculty, alumni, the state legislature, or even anti-war protesters. Jim Van Allen, a longtime Iowa faculty member in physics and astronomy and a dear friend of Sandy and his family, said it best: "Great communication is important, but Sandy always valued the relationship first." Third and lastly was Sandy's dedication to this great institution. No one loved this university more than Sandy. Always an advocate for students and faculty alike, he often spoke that now famous quote, "People, not structures, make for great universities." We've all heard it. During Sandy's tenure as president, the student population increased by 12,000. And for someone who was so committed to students and human resources, he also oversaw the construction of 8 new and very important academic buildings. At a Waterloo alumni gathering one evening, a rather critical alum asked Sandy, he said, "Why the heck do we need all those weird-looking buildings? Why couldn't they just all be alike?" Sandy's response, "Our physical differences are a reflection of our diversity of thought." No more questions. Indeed, in the 1970s, academic and classroom space was so limited that Sandy and his family moved from 102 Church Street, the president's home, back to their River Street residence. The university's urban and regional planning department took up the 2 top floors with the main floor, which is still being used for university events. And that lasted for 7 years. Again, this was Sandy's passion, was to find ways to satisfy the university's human element. One more example of how committed he was to the institution and his responsibilities, he actually missed his 90th birthday party at his home, complete with a Hawkeye marching band, because he was meeting and counseling students. He did make it the next year. Finally, his commitment to Iowa went well beyond Iowa City, as he would make that yearly trip to Des Moines to lobby legislators in regard to budget and funding. No matter what the outcome, oftentimes disappointing, Sandy would always say, "Never, never be dismissive about our state legislature. Always remember, the state is our largest donor." He truly believed that, and more times than not, the funding would come. As we're speaking of funding, let's not forget Sandy's friendship and allegiance with the family of Roy J. Carver. Sandy nurtured that early relationship with Roy and his family, which ultimately led to nearly $250 million in support for many areas within this university, from athletics to healthcare. Sandy's relationship spanned 50 years with the family. Until his death, he was still serving on the board of trustees of the Roy J. Carver Charitable Trust. Now, there was a television show back in the 1960s called The Naked City, cops and robber stuff. In the introduction, there was this disembodied voice that started each show with the statement, "There are 8 million stories in the naked city." I think in this group assembled here today, there are probably more than 8 million Sandy stories. Here's one more. Sandy and Susan were in their car uptown and stopped at a stoplight in front of Old Capitol, corner of Iowa Avenue and Clinton Street, sunny Sunday afternoon in 1980. Suddenly a car pulled up next to them, and as Susan described it, and I hope I'm doing justice here, Susan, it was a car full of what appeared to be some very, very excited students. Susan added that they wanted us to roll down the window, and Sandy obliged. One of the young men threw himself out of the passenger side window, pointed at Sandy, who was driving, and yelled, "Coach Fry, you are awesome!" As Susan recalled, there was a few seconds of relative quiet as Sandy rolled up the window, and then she said, "Oh, gee, Sandy, at least they thought you were someone." Susan, you couldn't have said it better. Sandy, thank you for touching our lives. You were indeed a someone.
In 1981, Sandy became the president of the Field Museum of Natural History. In his 15-year tenure, not only did he make substantial changes to the field, but he also left his mark on the broader museum community. Sandy was among the first university president that came to major museums to serve in a leadership capacity. And it was no secret that his leadership and vision of what the museum should become was evidence that the museum's trustees were right in their decision to bring him to Chicago. I wasn't with Sandy in 1981, but I joined his team 3 years later and worked with him for nearly 13 years. I might add, those were 13 years that changed the trajectory of my career and my life. Supporting Sandy in the financial and operational activities of the museum was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Let me tell you how my journey with Sandy started. In 1984, shortly after a series of interviews with search executives and countless numbers of meetings with trustees and other staff members, I found myself in the office of the president of the Field Museum. To say that I was intimidated and nervous is an understatement. Yet, after a few meetings with Sandy and all the others in the museum community, I knew that this was going to be a great place to work, and Sandy would be a very special boss. Finally, the day came, and I was convinced that Sandy was going to offer me the position as his financial vice president. But first, as I anticipated, he leaned back in his chair, something that I later observed that he did every time he was going to make a point. He looked me straight in the eye and he said, "If I offer you this position, you're going to help me to move that road." He was pointing to Lakeshore Drive. And some of you may remember at that time, Lakeshore Drive ran on both sides of the museum. And it's not surprising that often Sandy would refer to the museum as an island in a sea of traffic. Well, since I was completely caught off guard, I just looked at him and said, "Sure." And I thought that maybe I was going to have to learn how to operate a backhoe. Well, funding for the museum, or for Lakeshore Drive, was to be from the 1993 World's Fair. Of course, the World's Fair didn't come off. So Sandy could not be stopped by a mere World's Fair not coming off. So he and members of our trustees continued to work until it finally happened. He couldn't be stopped. Lakeshore Drive was moved. The museum campus was created. And I did not have to spend one day on a backhoe. Although I spent many days at the City of Chicago, the Park District, and the Department of Transportation to help Sandy's vision come to pass. I'm reminded of Daniel Burnham when I think of this story of Sandy. When it comes to Lakeshore Drive, Sandy made no little plans. I can't share all the accomplishments of Sandy and his time at the museum without violating the Boyd Doctrine, to be brief. But his vision of museums, their exhibits, and their public education was the foundation for much of what you see today at the Field Museum. He believed that objects should be put in the context of the time and use of those objects. He also believed that museum exhibits should have a curriculum and that the exhibit itself was to be the teacher. So he reorganized the museum and created two divisions, one for public museum education and for exhibits, and the other for research and collections. Then he found the right people to head these organizations, and the museum flourished. Sandy was not only a leader in the museum community here in Chicago, or there in Chicago, but he was a leader in the museum community nationally and worldwide. And he made some great strides in the legal, ethical, and compliance side of the museum operations. He even got the National Association, the American Association of Museums, to change their policy on how we fund care and collection of exhibits, which, unless you know museums, was a really big deal. He insisted that the advocacy for cultural institutions must take place at the national, state, and local level. He was a major advocate for cultural institutions and especially for collection-based research. Just the little that I've shared with you here today, I hope shows the importance of Sandy to the Field Museum and to the museum and cultural community at large. His leadership was remarkable and significant, but you already knew that. I cannot say enough about the incredible, encouraging, and supportive way in which Sandy worked with all the people that he interacted with. I know it's been my great good fortune and honor to have known him, to have called him friend and mentor.
It's 2002, and Mary Sue Coleman, after a triumphal run as the University of Iowa president, is headed for the presidency of the University of Michigan. And Sandy Boyd is called back into service as interim president. I was at the time serving as vice president for external relations, and so it fell to me to put together a press conference. And I was told explicitly, you need to handle Sandy. Although not a lawyer, I checked carefully in my job description. It was not in there. Nonetheless, came the reporters, came the public. The time was drawing close, and no Sandy. So I asked, do we have a phone number at which I can reach him? They gave me a phone number. I called him. Sandy picked it up. I said, Sandy, people are here. They're waiting for you. They're excited about your leadership. And Sandy interrupted me, and he said, now, just a minute. I have some questions. I said, Sandy, can we deal with these questions later when you're my boss? Because the reporters, and he interrupted me and he said, my daughter recently told me I smell old. Do you think, David, do you think that I should sprinkle on some cologne? I said, Sandy, I don't think the reporters are going to be close enough to smell you. Please come over here. And he said, now just a minute. You need to guide me on an important matter. I said, Sandy, please, anything, just come here. He said, do I need to wear socks? I'm not wearing socks every day. I said, Sandy, the reporters are not going to smell you. The reporters are not going to look at your ankles. They want to salute your leadership. Would you please come here? And Sandy came and he entered the room and everything was calm. And Sandy's leadership and manner took over. And the press conference went well, as did his leadership. Sandy, a Minnesotan who became, if you'll agree with me, the quintessential Iowan. A player coach before that term was widely used. Sandy did. Sandy taught. Sandy led. He was a hero to me. He was a mentor for me. He was a direct but gentle critic when I needed to hear it on more than one occasion. He was a renowned university president and a leader who then became one of the most respected museum leaders. And after a while, trying in my own way to follow very, very slightly in his footsteps, life had a way of putting me back in perspective to Sandy Boyd. If I would run into someone who knew him during his leadership as a president, when I was a university president, they usually said to me, aha, now Sandy Boyd, now that was a president. And later, when I followed his footsteps to work in the world of collections and culture, and I would run into someone in the American Alliance of Museums who knew or knew of Sandy, they would say to me, Sandy Boyd, now that was a museum leader. What are you going to do? Well, what Sandy meant to me was an example of how one can be honest and straightforward but kind, how one can be critical but gentle, how one can be sweet but stern, and how one, as it has been already eloquently said, can stick to principles. And so in every way imaginable, in the walls of knowledge that we all walk and from which we have learned, Sandy was one of my heroes and remains so to this day and will be every day that I'm walking on this earth. But in thinking about these remarks and wanting to keep them short, because I don't want Susan talking to me about the length of my speeches, I would like to close with a question that Robin and I have been pondering for quite a while and getting nowhere with. I've asked a lot of people about this in recent weeks, and I've not been able to get an answer, and not been able to hear anything close to a good answer. So I'm going to put it to you, and perhaps at the reception we can talk about this. I ask you today, was Sandy Boyd the Caitlin Clark of university presidents? Or is Caitlin Clark the Sandy Boyd of women's basketball? I leave it to you. Thank you.
Tough to follow Scorton. Each of us up here has been given a specific time of Sandy's life to reflect on, and I've been asked to focus especially on his time after his return to Iowa City. Sandy returned to Iowa Law in Iowa City in 1996, and he was centered there at the law school for his time, except for his time as interim president from 2002 to 2003. And he formally retired from the College of Law and the university in 2015. When Sandy returned from Chicago and alighted back at the law school, the building was quite literally in a different place than when he had left, and it was in a new building. It also had a different name. That building was the Boyd Law Building. It opened in 1986, and it was named in his honor as a tribute to his wonderful presidency. And that's kind of ironic because, as everyone knows, everybody's heard it, it's people, not structures, not buildings, that make a great institution. But let me tell you how we honor Sandy's values at the Boyd Law Building now and the presence that he has there. A bust of Sandy, a life-size bust, welcomes everyone who walks into the lobby of our building. That bust has become an important feature of our community and a symbol for us in so many ways. You should come visit Sandy's bust sometime. Sandy's bust wore a mask throughout the pandemic. Sandy's bust often sports athletic gear during game days. He dons a t-shirt to urge us to vote on election day, and he usually wears academic regalia on commencement day. Students often take selfies with the bust, and I think I've even taken a selfie with Louis Boyd with the bust. And he also wears a crown on Sandy's birthday. Those are traditions that, with the blessing of his family, we will continue. Sandy may be gone, but his spirit is very much alive at the Boyd Law Building. I personally didn't arrive as dean until after Sandy had left the College of Law and fully retired from the university. So why am I here today? Well, one of the reasons is because the reason I'm in Iowa City today is partially attributable to Sandy. I met Sandy Boyd at their son Tom's house in St. Paul, probably around 2002 or 2003. He and Susan were regular visitors as they made their trip to Madeline Island in the summer, sometimes at holidays and that sort of thing. And I got to meet him numerous times when he was visiting St. Paul. My own family was spending about 6 years in Minnesota at that time, and we were fortunate to be neighbors of Tom and Liz and Tom and Louis Boyd, and got to know them a lot. And my family eventually left for warmer climates in Arizona and New Mexico, but we remained close with the Boyds. When I was called about the deanship at Iowa, I thought my wife would surely veto the idea about going back to the cold Midwest. But she said, you know, most of the people that we met that we really liked in the Twin Cities were from Iowa. And she was talking about the Boyds. And that was more than 6 years ago. And plus, Sandy told me that I was not the first person to leave New Mexico and land at Iowa. His friend David Vernon had made the same path, or similar path, a few years earlier. Second, I'm still standing here as the law school dean after all that we've been through with the pandemic and everything else, because I was blessed with Sandy's wisdom ever since I arrived. One of the things we all love about Sandy was that after he left Minnesota for Iowa, he remained loyal to Iowa and the university until the day he died. And that loyalty bought a lot of us a lot of free advice. My first visit to Oak Knoll was to visit Sandy and to seek his guidance. I now have several good advisors at Oak Knoll, some of them who've given me advice even when I don't ask. Not talking about Arthur. But Sandy was the first at Oak Knoll to give me good advice. Sandy always had a stream of callers, and he was gracious to every one of them, but no more so than if they showed up with a triple berry pie. That was the trick. Even if he was tired, he would see you if you had a triple berry pie. And I thank Betsy and Susan for that tip. Over the past years, when I went to visit Sandy at Oak Knoll, I would go with others many times, once with the University of Iowa president, once with Professor Jason Rantanen of our school, who holds the Boyd Hammer professorship at the law school. I've been with my family, and I've been usually just by myself to go visit Sandy. When COVID caused a halt to in-person visits inside Oak Knoll, Sandy would still see people, but he had to be wheeled out to the back patio. The Oak Knoll rules required visitors to stay in their car, but you could drive up, and Sandy would sit out there on the back patio and dispense advice. It was like a drive-through for sage advice and counseling. And a lot of us used that resource. He was a busy guy. when the weather was good, at any rate. In preparing for today, I consulted with former deans Bill Hines, Carolyn Jones, and Gail Agarwal of the law school, and each of them shared with me similar stories of wise counsel and recounted Sandyisms, one of which was that old presidents should be rarely seen and rarely heard. He said that and he believed it, but he was always willing to help out. He could place rough moments, controversies in context and perspective and help you deal with them. He could help you see the long view of the controversy of the day. And best of all, he was discreet. His advice was always delivered in private, and he didn't tell others. Another bit of color from the other deans was related to football. Game day remains an important part of the Iowa law experience, but it sits a little uncomfortably with the academic enterprise. We academics can be a little bit nerdy, I suppose. But one of my predecessors shared with me the lore that Sandy would sometimes go to football games, but sometimes with a book under his arm. And later he would deny it. One thing he wouldn't deny on game day was a love for Jerry and Margie's bratwursts that are served at the law school cookout before games. As recently as this past fall, his beloved son Boyd and our beloved alum, Bill Boyd, would stop by the pregame at the BLB, the Boyd Law Building, to make a plate for Sandy and take it to him over at Oak Knoll. Last thing I wanted to say was, as law school dean, I've had the opportunity, the pleasure really, of overseeing the Larned Waterman Nonprofit Resource Center, which was Sandy's passion project when he came back to the law school. Sandy loved nonprofit enterprises that serve their communities, and he created the Waterman Nonprofit Center to ensure that the academic enterprise could have a real impact in the community and also improve our teaching. Through curriculum first developed by Sandy, the center to this day trains students in nonprofit law and provides guidance to nonprofit centers throughout the state, from tax issues, best practices in nonprofit leadership, management, that sort of thing. And the center assists nonprofits throughout Iowa still today, from famous ones like the Blank Park Zoo in Des Moines and the Stanley Center for Peace and Security over in Muscatine, to small nonprofits in rural communities that probably most of us have never heard of. Sandy cared for communities, and he understood better than anyone how to bring the academic commitment to bear in such a way that it improved the community. And he improved the community, he improved students, and frankly, the whole state of Iowa. Iowa Law named our service award in his honor, and the Boyd Service Award is a graduation prize earned by students for doing pro bono service. And we usually have multiple prize winners every year. And they try to show the same commitment to community service that Sandy exemplified. Sandy always said, sometimes with Susan's prompting, make your point, then stop talking. Let me take that advice and let me bring up the 22nd president of the University of Iowa.
I offer my heartfelt thanks to Susan and to the Boyd family for inviting us here to gather today to honor the life of a true legend on our campus, President Emeritus Willard Sandy Boyd. We're celebrating the life of a great man, but also the life of a great university. And I think Sandy would have wanted us to see today's gathering in that way. I wish I could have had the opportunity to know Sandy longer and to benefit even more from his friendship, advice, and wisdom. Nevertheless, his values, his example, and his character will live on with me as long as I serve as president and beyond. From the first moment that I met Sandy in person, I was struck by his dedication to the university, as well as his deep humanity, enthusiasm, and his humor. For our first get-together, Sandy wanted it to be just the two of us. And Dave Dirks remembers this. He drove me over to Oak Knoll and said, he just wants you in the room, nobody else. He made me feel at home right away, and he told me to pull my chair closer in spite of the fact that COVID was still a risk. Sandy asked me what my priorities would be as a new president. When I told him that my priorities would focus on student success and well-being, as well as our relationship to the state, especially legislative leaders, He grinned broadly and he said, "That's great. Exactly what I would do." From the start, it was clear we were on the same wavelength. The next time I visited Sandy, he invited at least 2 students who worked in healthcare there at Oak Knoll into his room so that they could meet me. Afterwards, Sandy said, "I know how much you care about students, so I wanted you to meet them." I was so touched by how he remembered our earlier conversation and our shared commitment to students. Sandy's timeless values and his bold vision for this institution were forged in the early days of his leadership at Iowa, and they will continue to live on. 20 years ago, in his address to the university, when taking on the mantle of interim president, this is the second time, he said the following: "Iowa remains a university in an era of multiversities. The river runs through the campus. It does not divide us." Sandy always emphasized the importance of the unity of all of our programs and disciplines. And he said, "They are linked and they are interlinked." I can think of no better description of the special academic character of the University of Iowa. Sandy's humanity and compassion placed people at the center of his leadership. Captured in the saying that we've heard from many of us, people, not structures, make a great university. For my installation as the University of Iowa president a little over a year ago, actually almost 2 years ago, Sandy made a very warm video welcome for me. In it, he said, "It's about time we came to realize how important others are, and others give meaning to our lives. That should be the most important educational objective of a university." Another major pillar of Sandy's values was the university's commitment to the people of our state. As he said, "A vibrant university depends on a vibrant Iowa. A vibrant Iowa depends on a vibrant university." And in his video for my installation, he emphasized again that we, quote, "must always remember that we are here to serve Iowa, first and foremost." To best honor the life and legacy of Sandy Boyd, we should dedicate ourselves as fully and as passionately as possible to his values: fairness, educational opportunity for all, free speech and free inquiry, the integrity and integration of disciplines, and service to people. We stand on the vision, wisdom, and leadership of Sandy Boyd in keeping his ideas and his principles strong and vibrant to the present day here at the University of Iowa. And we do that through our passion and commitment to our work. At the end of my installation video, Sandy gave me one last memorable piece of advice. "Give 'em hell, Barbara." That fiery spirit Sandy exemplified so well is a driver for me today, and I think for all of us, each and every day. Although Sandy may have passed from this world, he will never pass from our hearts and our minds, nor from the character of this great university. And he also said for my installation, once you're involved with the university, it's part of your life as long as you live. Today and every day, we also know that Sandy Boyd will be part of our lives as long as we live, and he will always be part of the life of the University of Iowa. We would like to conclude today with words from Sandy himself, a recording of his first commencement speech as president of the University of Iowa on May 28, 1970. This occurred during the spring, when you've already heard protests against the Vietnam War grew violent. Due to safety concerns, students had been allowed to leave campus early, but Sandy wanted to make sure the university did not shut down. and he succeeded in that goal. For commencement, the invited speaker was canceled. Instead, Sandy gave the address, which, as was typical for him, was brief yet eloquent. His words beautifully capture his values and the values of the university, which we still aspire to today.
Now, the President, Willard R. Boyd, to deliver the traditional charge to the graduates.
We mourn those who have died at Jackson State, in Vietnam, at Kent State, and in Cambodia. In our sorrow, we must affirm them. We fail them if we do not work for peace, freedom, and education. To deny one of these is to deny them all. To achieve these ends, we must reject destruction, repression, and indifference. We must embrace tolerance, persuasion, and concern. In a democracy, the means are as important as the ends, and no one has the legal or moral authority to usurp the rights of others. We are obligated to respect the rights of all. We are also obligated to take stock of ourselves. No individual, no institution, no society can be satisfied with itself if it is to survive. What is wise social policy in one era may not be wise policy in another. Policies must be reassessed. Reassessment should not be feared, but rather encouraged. This is true whether the issue is war, human rights, or taxes. It is essential, however, that the debate be open and free from intimidation and coercion. What is true of society generally is especially true of the university in particular. The university must not be a prison of dogma, but rather a port for conflicting points of view. The universities must and will remain open as centers of free inquiry. We must be producers of new ways, not just teachers of old ways. We must be willing to reason, to tolerate, and to respect. We must recognize that there can be honesty in our differences, that respect can emerge from diversity, and that progress takes many forms. The time has come for you to part from this university. You have invested your energies in this place, and we trust that you have enhanced your life here. Your forebears founded and nurtured this university. It is up to you to justify its present and guarantee its future.
You have just heard the traditional charge to the graduates delivered by the President of the University, President Willard Boyd.